Beneath the jagged carcass of a shattered starship, the void stretched endless and merciless. A lone figure knelt at the very edge of a fractured hull, her silhouette framed by the cold shimmer of distant suns. Her hand gripped a blade of obsidian alloy, the edge still faintly glowing from the heat of battle. The alien warrior's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one ragged with exhaustion. She whispered words in a language older than the stars around her, vows of failure, guilt, and the end she believed she had earned. Her name was Kayles, though no one remained alive to speak it aloud. She had been commander of thousands, a soldier bred from youth to believe in victory or dignified death. Yet her fleet lay scattered like ash, her soldiers annihilated in a battle that should never have been fought. Smoke drifted from the ruin around her, the metallic tang of burnt circuits biting at her senses. She could not remember when the screaming had stopped, only that it had, and in the silence that followed, despair had taken root so completely she felt hollow. To her people, this was the moment of honor, to end the pain before dishonor could swallow her name. The blade trembled in her hand. Kayles' throat tightened, but she pressed the sharpened edge to the scaled skin of her chest. The cold of it steadied her. She closed her eyes and whispered goodbye to no one. A noise startled her, a scrape against metal, faint but distinct. Her eyes shot open. She turned, expecting a scavenger drone or one last enemy survivor. Instead, a figure stepped from the shadows of the wreckage. His armor was battered and scorched, mismatched with makeshift repairs, and his face bore streaks of soot and blood. His movements were weary but deliberate, the gait of a man who had survived too many things that should have killed him. A human. Kayles' lip curled in disdain. Of all the races she had fought alongside or against, humans baffled her the most. They were fragile, short-lived, reckless to the point of lunacy. Yet this one, standing before her, had lived through the same inferno that had destroyed her people. He regarded her without fear, as though he'd known she would be here, as though she was just another soldier caught in the wreckage. "You shouldn't be alive," Kayles said, her voice low, rasping from smoke and grief. The human tilted his head, then gave the faintest shrug. "Neither should you." Her hand tightened around the blade. She did not want company, least of all his. "Leave me," she commanded. He stepped closer, boots crunching over charred plating. He was taller than she had expected, broad-shouldered but not imposing. His eyes, though, were sharp, unflinching in their attention. "If I walk away, you'll be gone before I take 10 steps." She bared her teeth in a humorless snarl. "And what is it to you? You know nothing of me, nothing of my failure." The human stopped a few paces from her. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply looked at her, gaze unwavering. "My name's Marcus Hale. I don't need to know everything to see what's about to happen. And I'm not leaving." Kayles' chest burned. This was no place for his persistence, no room for his absurd sense of duty. "Your kind clings to survival as though it has meaning," she said, pressing the blade harder against her skin. A faint line of blood welled beneath the edge. "We accept when the war is lost. There is honor in ending what cannot be mended." Marcus studied her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Kayles almost hoped he would finally leave. But then he moved closer, until the heat of his breath brushed against her scaled cheek. His voice dropped, so quiet she almost did not hear him. He whispered. The words pierced through her like a blade more precise than the one in her hand. Her grip faltered. The weapon trembled. Her eyes widened, confusion warring with fury, with disbelief. How could mere sounds, a handful of syllables, spoken softly, unravel her resolve that had been forged over decades? She tried to summon the strength to ignore them, to laugh at the absurdity, yet the blade refused to move. Her arms shook violently. Her heart pounded as if it were fighting her, urging her to stop. Kayles shut her eyes tight, willing herself to reclaim her certainty, but the whisper echoed in her mind, louder than any battlefield cry. At last, with a strangled sound, she lowered the weapon. It clattered against the metal hull and spun away into the shadows. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her chest heaving, as though she had survived a battle more brutal than the one that had destroyed her fleet. She turned on him, eyes blazing. "What have you done to me?" Marcus only held her gaze, steady and calm, as though nothing extraordinary had passed between them. His features were drawn with exhaustion, but his voice carried an unshakable steadiness. "I reminded you of something you already knew." Kaylee's thoughts churned. She wanted to demand he explain, wanted to strike him, perhaps even raise the blade again. Yet something inside her had shifted. Some crack had formed in the wall of despair she had built around herself. And no matter how she tried, she could not seal it shut. Silence fell between them, broken only by the distant groans of a dying ship. The stars outside gleamed cold and indifferent, yet Kaylee found she could not look away from Marcus. She hated him for interfering, hated him more for succeeding. But she was alive, and that, against her will, was enough to stay her hand. She turned her face from him, staring back into the abyss. "You've delayed what must be done," she muttered. Marcus's answer came, without hesitation. "Maybe. Or maybe I've given you a reason not to do it at all." Kaylee said nothing. She could not admit he had already done exactly that. But as the void stretched before her, no longer did it look quite the same. "Would you like me to move directly into Section 2 with the same narrative style, or would you prefer a brief pause so we can refine the tone and pacing of Section 1 before continuing?" "You said." Kaylee sat in the ruins, her hands curled into fists upon her knees. The blade was gone, lost somewhere in the debris, but she still felt its weight pressing against her chest, a ghost of the decision she had nearly made. The whisper replayed in her mind without mercy, looping in fragments she could not silence. It infuriated her, not for its content alone, but for its persistence. Why did words from a stranger gnaw at her with more force than years of tradition and discipline? She was supposed to be stronger than this. Marcus had not moved far. He leaned against a tilted bulkhead, breathing heavily, his face pale beneath the streaks of soot. Though he said nothing, Kaylee sensed he was watching her. His silence was not weakness, but an intent refusal to crowd her further. Still, she could not stand the pressure of his presence. "You presume much," she said finally, her voice sharp as broken glass. "One whisper, and you think you have undone a lifetime?" His eyes lifted to hers, weary but unwavering. "Not undone. Just reminded. Sometimes it takes so little to break the pattern we trap ourselves in." Her laugh was bitter. "Your kind does not understand. We measure our worth not in how long we cling to life, but in how well we meet the end when it comes. My war is over. I have nothing left but the silence." Marcus shifted his weight, wincing as though some hidden wound pulled at him. He did not disguise the pain, nor the effort it took simply to stand. Yet his tone remained steady. "I've seen silence, buried friends in it, stared at the same choice you were about to make. I decided against it, not because I had a reason, but because I hoped tomorrow might give me one." Kaylee stiffened. The sentiment was incomprehensible, reckless in its simplicity. Hope without logic, choice without strategy. "Your philosophy is chaos," she snapped. "What if tomorrow only brings more pain?" "Then I'll take it," Marcus answered. He met her glare, without flinching. "Because as long as pain exists, so does the chance for something beyond it. If I quit, I'll never know." The word struck her harder than she wanted to admit. She had been raised on absolutes: victory or death, strength or weakness, honor or shame. To linger in between was weakness. Yet here stood a human who embraced the in-between as if it were the very core of strength. She looked away, unsettled. Her hands trembled, though she willed them still. "You speak of hope as if it were a weapon." Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Sometimes it is. Not the kind that wins battles with fleets and fire, but the kind that keeps someone moving when the universe says stop." The simplicity of it burned in her thoughts, defying the weight of her upbringing. She wanted to reject it outright, to call it foolish. And yet the whisper still echoed inside her, refusing to fade. Her gaze drifted over him, taking in the ragged condition of his armor, the raw determination in his posture. Every scar spoke of battle survived, not one. His was a resilience, not born of power, but of refusal. Against reason, against statistics, against despair, he endured. "How many have you lost?" she asked suddenly. He did not pretend to misunderstand. His eyes flickered with memory, the shadow of grief barely restrained. "Too many. Friends, family, comrades. I stopped counting a long time ago." "Then why not end it?" she pressed, her voice harsh. "Why not accept the inevitable like I was prepared to?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because if I did, their deaths would be the end of the story. If I keep going, maybe I can make their lives mean something more." The bluntness of it stunned her. She searched his expression for any sign of pretense, but found none. He meant every word, and the weight of it pressed against her chest harder than her blade ever had. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Kayleigh felt something fracture inside her, a crack in the cold armor of her despair. She loathed it, feared it, yet could not deny it. The whisper, the persistence, the absurd defiance, it all gnawed at her, reshaping the silence she had thought immutable. The hull beneath them groaned as the wreck settled further into the debris field. Sparks hissed from a severed conduit nearby. The battlefield was not finished consuming itself. Kayleigh realized how precarious their shelter was, how easily death might still come unbidden. Yet for the first time, she did not reach for the thought of escape through her own hand. Marcus lowered himself to sit across from her, exhaustion catching up with him. He did not try to close the distance further, nor did he attempt to soothe her turmoil. His stillness became its own answer. He would remain until she chose otherwise. Kayleigh studied him, her throat tight with conflicting emotions. She should have dismissed him, should have told him his words were the babble of a short-lived species too stubborn to know when to die. Instead, she found herself asking, "Do you truly believe tomorrow can change what cannot be undone?" His reply was quiet, but there was no hesitation in it. "Yes. Always." The certainty in his tone left her hollow, not because she believed him, but because some part of her wanted to. That was the most dangerous thought of all. Silence stretched again, heavy yet strangely less suffocating than before. Kayleigh's gaze drifted to the stars beyond the shattered hull. They looked the same as they always had, cold, indifferent pinpricks in the void. Yet something in her perspective shifted. Perhaps it was Marcus's voice echoing still, or perhaps it was the crack in her despair widening further. Either way, she could not look at the abyss and see only an ending. Her jaw tightened. She hated that he had done this to her, hated more that he had succeeded. "You are reckless," she said at last, the words bitter but faintly unsteady. Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile. "I've been called worse." Her eyes narrowed. "And if your words prove false?" "Then at least I gave you another chance to decide for yourself," he said. His gaze softened, though the weight behind it remained. "That's more than surrender ever offers." Kayleigh had no response. She turned back toward the void, but the blade no longer haunted her thoughts as it had before. Her silence was no longer the silence of finality, but of conflict unresolved, fragile and dangerous. The hull moaned again, a reminder of the wreck's instability, but she did not move. Marcus remained across from her, patient, unrelenting in his presence. They sat there as the dying ship groaned around them, two survivors suspended between despair and defiance. For the first time since the battle ended, Kayleigh did not know what she would choose. And for the first time, she realized that uncertainty might itself be a reason to live. "Would you like me to carry this same slow burn, intimate pacing into Section 3, or would you prefer a sharper pivot into action and external conflict?" "You said." The wreck creaked again, louder this time, as if the carcass of the starship had grown restless with their indecision. Kayleigh braced her palm against the scorched plating, sensing vibrations beneath her claws. The ship was shifting, but not from its own collapse. A mechanical rhythm intruded on the silence, the steady, insectal scrape of metal against metal. She froze, instinct sharpening. Marcus noticed her stiffening before he heard it. His hand went to the ruined holster at his side, pulling free a sidearm whose charged cell flickered weakly. He scanned the jagged corridor behind them, his expression tightening. "We're not alone." The sound grew louder, closer, a chorus of clicking limbs and whirring servos. Kaylee's recognized it instantly. Her throat tightened with old hatred. Scavenger drones. They come to strip what's left. Flesh and metal both. Marcus grimaced, checking the power indicator on his weapon. The red light pulsed faintly, almost dead. And I'm guessing they're not programmed to differentiate between scrap and survivors. "They will not hesitate," she said coldly. Her hand itched for the blade she had discarded, though she knew even with it, the odds were poor. "Perhaps this is fitting. Death finds us regardless." Marcus shot her a glance, sharp and defiant. "Not if we make them earn it." She almost laughed. Even facing certain death, he clung to that absurd defiance. Yet something in his tone unsettled her resolve. He was not boasting, not seeking glory. He simply refused to accept inevitability. The first drone scuttled into view, its spindly legs glinting in the dim light, optical sensors flaring red. Behind it came more, a swarm of angular bodies crawling over the wreckage. Their cutting claws clicked, eager to carve. Marcus raised his weapon and fired. The shot cracked through the silence, searing into the lead drone's head. Sparks exploded, the machine collapsing with a shriek of torn servos. The recoil nearly staggered him, but he gritted his teeth, holding steady. The swarm hissed in mechanical unison and surged forward. Kaylee's body moved before her mind caught up. She lunged, snatching a jagged length of pipe from the debris. The improvised weapon was heavy, unwieldy, but it felt solid in her hands. She swung it wide, shattering a drone's sensor cluster with brutal force. Metal fragments scattered across the floor. Marcus fought with methodical precision, each blast aimed to disable, to buy seconds more of breathing room. But the power cell was draining fast, and he knew it. When the pistol clicked empty, he hurled it into a drone's face and seized another piece of debris for a makeshift club. Kaylee's caught a glimpse of him beside her, bleeding from a gash along his temple, his arms trembling from exhaustion, yet he did not falter. She had fought alongside thousands of warriors, but never had she seen one so determined to claw against futility itself. "Fall back," he shouted, swinging his weapon into another machine. "We can't hold them here." She snarled as claws scraped her shoulder, tearing through armor to draw blood. Pain burned, but she forced herself onward, striking down her attacker with a crushing blow. "Where would you have us go? The void welcomes us on all sides." "Then we make a path," he snapped. His voice carried no command of rank, no arrogance of authority, only raw insistence, the certainty of a man who believed in the impossible. The drones pressed harder, their numbers overwhelming, their limbs slicing and tearing. Kaylee staggered under the onslaught, strength waning. In her mind, she heard again the silence she had been ready to embrace, the easy surrender of finality. For a heartbeat, it tempted her. Then she looked at Marcus. He was bloodied, battered, standing against a tide no one could withstand. His weapon cracked against steel, his body nearly buckling, yet his eyes still burned with refusal. If he was afraid, he buried it beneath a will that defied reason itself. Something in her shifted. The whisper she had cursed now became a drumbeat in her chest. If this human could fight when there was no chance, what excuse had she to fall? With a roar, Kaylee swung her makeshift weapon in a wide arc, smashing two drones at once. Sparks cascaded around her. She planted her feet, holding the line beside him. Marcus glanced at her, breath ragged, and managed a fierce, fleeting grin. Together they pressed forward, not in victory but in survival, each second stolen from the swarm a declaration of defiance. Kaylee's arms ached, blood ran freely down her side, but she felt alive in a way she had not since before the war began. Every strike, every breath was a rejection of the death she had so willingly sought. At last, the wreck itself came to their aid. The groaning hull gave way, with a shuddering crack, a section collapsing between them and the advancing drones. Fire and smoke billowed from ruptured conduits, swallowing half the swarm in flame. The survivors screeched electronically, retreating into the shadows. Silence returned, broken only by their gasping breaths. Kayleigh dropped her twisted weapon, her arms trembling. Marcus leaned against the bulkhead, sliding down until he sat on the floor, his chest heaving. For a long moment neither spoke. The air stank of ozone and charred metal. Kayleigh pressed a hand to her bleeding shoulder, then looked at him. He was barely upright, eyes glazed with exhaustion, yet still conscious, still present. "You are mad," she said at last, her voice hoarse. He wiped blood from his brow, smearing soot across his skin. "Probably. But we're alive." Her gaze lingered on him, and for once she did not sneer. Something in his words, in his stubborn grin despite the blood and ruin, pierced deeper than she cared to admit. She had chosen life in that moment not because of honor or duty, but because his refusal to yield had lit a spark inside her she thought long dead. The wreck groaned again, quieter now, settling into uneasy stillness. The swarm had retreated, but the danger was far from over. Kayleigh knew more would come. Yet instead of dread, she felt a strange, foreign anticipation. She lowered her gaze, voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps tomorrow is not as empty as I thought." Marcus's eyes flicked to her, and though he was too weary to smile, there was a light in his expression that told her he had heard. "Do you want Section 4 to reveal the whispered words outright in Marcus's voice, or should I keep the revelation until the very last lines of the story for maximum impact?" "You said." Kayleigh sat with her back against the scorched wall of the ruined corridor, the heat of battle still clinging to her skin. Blood had dried in dark streaks along her arm, and her breath carried the weight of exhaustion. Yet for all the wounds and ruin around her, she found herself listening to the rasping rhythm of Marcus's breathing. He slumped nearby, his armor cracked open, chest rising and falling in stubborn cadence. Every time his breath caught, she felt a pang of unease, as though the silence she had once craved now threatened to swallow her from a different angle. She had not asked for his presence, nor his words, nor his fight beside her. And yet, when the drones descended, it was his defiance that had dragged her forward. He had forced her to move, to act, to strike against the inevitable when all she had wanted was surrender. That truth gnawed at her more deeply than any wound. She turned her gaze to him, her eyes narrowing. "You fight as though survival itself is a victory." His head tilted toward her, though his body seemed ready to collapse. "Sometimes it is." The simplicity of it unsettled her. She had measured her life by duty and legacy, by honor that transcended the individual. He measured his by breath stolen from a hostile universe. And somehow, his measure felt stronger in this moment than hers had ever been. "You whispered something," she said, her voice sharp but unsteady. "Back when I held the blade."
"Tell me what you said."
"I need to know why it stopped me." Marcus's eyes closed, his head resting against the wall. For a moment she thought he might not answer, but then his voice came, low and steady despite his fatigue. "I told you. If you die now, you'll never know what tomorrow could bring." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet immense. Kayleigh's chest tightened. They should have sounded absurd, fragile as mist, but instead they struck with the weight of stone. She had lived her life defined by certainty, wars fought, victories claimed, defeats endured. Tomorrow had never been unknown to her. It was always dictated by command, by destiny, by inevitability. Yet he dared to claim that tomorrow was not fixed, that the unknown itself was worth living for. She felt her throat constrict, her eyes burning with a sting she refused to name. "You expect me to abandon everything I was taught for such fragility?" Marcus opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with a steadiness that carried no demand, only truth. "Not abandon. Just question. If the life you've lived has only led you to despair, maybe it's worth trying another way." The words sliced through her again, not with cruelty, but with an intimacy she had never encountered. He spoke as one who had walked the same edge she had, who had felt the pull of ending it all, and still chosen otherwise. That shared recognition made her feel seen in a way that terrified her. She turned away, staring into the void through the fractured hull. The stars were the same as ever, cold, remote, infinite. But now they no longer looked like distant judges condemning her failure. They looked like possibilities, each one a future not yet written. She exhaled sharply, as if the very act of breathing defied the chains of her past. Silence settled again, heavy but alive. Kaylee's pulse quickened as she realized how close she had come to erasing herself, how near she had been to never hearing those words at all. Her claws dug lightly into her palms, grounding her in the present, in the choice she had not expected to make. She looked back at Marcus. His body was battered, his spirit unbowed. He was not extraordinary in strength or power, yet he carried within him something her people had never embraced, the refusal to surrender to despair. His hope was not logic, not strategy, not even faith. It was defiance incarnate, and it had kept him alive where any other would have fallen. For the first time in years, she felt the sting of tears. They slid unbidden down her scaled cheeks, hot against the cold air. She did not try to hide them. "I wanted to end it because I believed there was nothing left to fight for," she whispered. "But you've shown me something I cannot unsee. Tomorrow could be different, and I want to see it." Marcus's lips curved into the faintest smile, weak but real. "That's all I hoped for." The wreck groaned once more, a distant rumble echoing through its hollowed bones. Kaylee's knew the battlefield was not finished with them. More dangers would come, more trials to endure. But she no longer looked at those threats with the eyes of a warrior resigned to fate. She looked at them with the eyes of someone who had chosen life, not because it was easy, but because it was uncertain. She pushed herself to her feet, every muscle screaming, and extended a hand toward Marcus. He hesitated, pride flickering across his weary face, but at last he accepted. Her strength hauled him upright, and together they stood amid the ruins, scarred but unbroken. The stars stretched wide before them, the abyss no longer a place of endings, but of beginnings. Kaylee's heart pounded, alive with the promise of futures unwritten. "Tomorrow," she said, voice steady now, "we fight again. Not for honor, not for the dead, for what we have not yet seen." Marcus's smile deepened, faint but fierce. "That's the spirit." Side by side, they walked across the broken deck, two figures carved against the backdrop of ruin. The war was far from over, the universe still merciless. But where once Kaylee's had sought silence, she now carried within her a spark she would not let die. The whisper that had saved her life echoed still, not as a fragile reminder, but as a battle cry. Tomorrow could bring anything. And for the first time, she longed to meet it. "Would you like me to craft a short epilogue scene, just a few hundred words, as a final flourish after this climax, or should the story end exactly here on Kaylee's transformation?" You said. "Give image prompt for each section." ChatGPT said. "Perfect. I'll give you tailored image prompts for each section so you could generate illustrations for AI art tools like DALL-E, Midjourney, or Stable Diffusion. Each will match the tone and events of the corresponding section.